The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Sarah Zimmerman clutched the trembling woman behind her, her own heart pounding against her ribs like a wild stallion. It was 1876, and in this small Colorado town where men ruled with iron fists and whiskey courage, what Sarah had just done was unforgivable. She had dared to interfere with a man's property. "You ain't got no business stepping between a man and his wife," growled Frank Miller, his face contorted with rage as he advanced toward the two women huddled against the wall of the general store. His knuckles were already bloody from the beating he'd given his wife before Sarah's intervention. "She doesn't belong to you," Sarah said, her voice steadier than her legs felt. At 24, she'd seen enough of the world to know that silence in the face of cruelty was its own kind of sin. No one deserves to be treated like that. The crowd that had gathered watched with a mixture of morbid fascination and discomfort. No one moved to help. This was the way of things in Redemption Creek. Private matters stayed private, even when they spilled into the street in broad daylight. Miller's friends circled closer, their expressions promising retribution. "Think you're better than everybody, don't you? Coming here from Boston with your fancy ways," sneered one of them, a man whose breath reeked of cheap whiskey even from several feet away. Sarah had arrived in Redemption Creek 6 months earlier to take over the town's small schoolhouse after the previous teacher had fled back east. Her refined manners and education had already marked her as an outsider. Now her interference would cement her reputation as a troublemaker. "Please, miss," whispered Mrs. Miller, her swollen eye and split lip making her words slur slightly. "Just go, he'll kill us both." But Sarah stood her ground. "I won't leave you with him." The first blow came from behind, a hard shove that sent Sarah sprawling into the dirt. The second was a kick to her ribs that drove the air from her lungs in a painful rush. She curled instinctively, trying to protect herself as Miller's friends joined in, raining down blows while shouting obscenities. Through the haze of pain, Sarah heard Mrs. Miller's screams followed by the sound of a horse approaching at full gallop. Then a gunshot cracked through the air and the assault stopped abruptly. "That's enough," commanded a deep, authoritative voice. "Step away from her, now." Rough hands grabbed Sarah's attackers, pulling them back. Through swollen eyes, she looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun. As her vision cleared slightly, she made out the features of a man she'd seen around town, but never spoken to, a man known simply as Thomas Hayes, the rancher who owned the sprawling Triple H outside of town. Hayes dismounted with fluid grace, his movements controlled but radiating a lethal tension. Unlike most men in Redemption Creek, he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than bravado. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes were clear and piercing as he surveyed the scene. "6 men baiting 1 woman," he said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent street. "Is this what passes for courage in Redemption Creek these days?" Frank Miller stepped forward, chin jutting defiantly. "This ain't your concern, Hayes. This woman interfered with my business. Tried to take my wife." Hayes looked down at Sarah, then at Mrs. Miller, who was huddled nearby, before returning his gaze to Miller. "Seems to me she was trying to stop a murder. That makes it everybody's concern." "The law," Miller began. "Sheriff Daniels is 3 towns over for the week," Hayes cut in. "And I reckon if he were here, he'd tell you the law doesn't give you the right to beat a woman half to death." He holstered his gun but kept his hand near it. "Now, Mrs. Miller is going to come with me to Doc Peterson's, and Miss Zimmerman here is coming to my ranch until she's recovered." Miller's face darkened. "You can't just—" "I can," Hayes said simply, "and I am." He turned to the men who had participated in the beating. "Any of you touch either of these women again, you answer to me. Is that clear?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. One by one, the men backed away, muttering under their breath but unwilling to challenge Hayes directly. Hayes knelt beside Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Can you stand, Miss Zimmerman?" Sarah nodded, though every part of her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. Hayes offered his hand and she took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. The world spun alarmingly, and she would have fallen if not for his steadying arm around her waist. "Mrs. Miller first," Sarah insisted, her split lip making the words come out garbled. Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You did right, standing up for her when no one else would, and I'll protect you now, both of you." As Hayes helped her onto his horse, Sarah caught glimpses of the townsfolk watching, some with disapproval, others with grudging respect, and a few with something that might have been shame. She didn't care what they thought. For the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she felt she might have found an ally. The ride to Doc Peterson's office was mercifully short. The doctor, a gruff man in his 60s with hands gentler than his demeanor suggested, took one look at the two battered women and ushered them inside, his usual complaints about being disturbed conspicuously absent. After examining Mrs. Miller's injuries first at Sarah's insistence, Doc Peterson determined that while badly beaten, she would recover with proper care. "She'll need somewhere safe to stay," he said pointedly to Hayes. "My sister Rose runs the household at Triple H," Hayes replied. "She'll look after Mrs. Miller." "And Miss Zimmerman?" The doctor raised an eyebrow as he turned his attention to Sarah's injuries. "The same," Hayes said firmly. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist she could return to the small room behind the schoolhouse where she lived, but the room was swimming around her, and darkness was encroaching at the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was Hayes's concerned face hovering over her as she slipped into unconsciousness. When Sarah awoke, she was in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through curtains of a quality she hadn't seen since leaving Boston. The bed beneath her was similarly luxurious, the sheets soft against her battered body. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her ribs. "Easy now," said a woman's voice. "Doc Peterson said you've got 2 cracked ribs and more bruises than skin showing." Sarah turned her head carefully to see a woman perhaps a few years older than herself sitting in a chair by the bed. She had the same clear gray eyes as Hayes, though her face was softer, framed by dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I'm Rose Hayes," the woman said. "Thomas's sister." "You're at Triple H Ranch, and before you ask, you've been here for 2 days. 2 days, Sarah croaked, her throat dry. Rose nodded, reaching for a glass of water on the bedside table and helping Sarah take a few sips. "You've been in and out." "Doc Peterson said it was partly the beating and partly exhaustion. Seems you haven't been taking proper care of yourself, Miss Zimmerman." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Please call me Sarah, and where is Mrs. Miller?" "Martha is in the room across the hall." "She's doing better than you, physically at least." Rose's expression darkened. "Her spirit's another matter, been married to that monster for 8 years. What will happen to her now? For now, she stays here where she's safe. Thomas has made that clear to everyone in town, including her husband." Rose adjusted Sarah's pillows. "As for the future, that will be her choice, but she'll have options." Sarah relaxed slightly at this, "And Mr. Hayes, I should thank him. My brother's out on the range today. He's been checking on you whenever he's back at the house." Rose smiled slightly. Never seen him so concerned about anyone outside family before. Before Sarah could respond to this, the door opened and a young girl of about 12 poked her head in. "Aunt Rose, is she awake yet?" "Oh." The girl's face brightened when she saw Sarah looking back at her. "She is. Lily," Rose said with fond exasperation. "What did I tell you about knocking?" "Sorry," the girl said, not sounding sorry at all as she bounded into the room. "I'm Lily Hayes. Uncle Thomas brought you here on his horse like a princess in a story." Despite her pain, Sarah couldn't help smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "I'm afraid I wasn't much of a princess, more like a sack of potatoes, I imagine," Lily giggled. "You look better now that Aunt Rose washed all the blood off. Are you really the school teacher from town? Will you teach me things?" "Aunt Rose teaches me, but she says I need proper schooling." "Lily," Rose interrupted, "Miss Zimmerman needs rest, not an interrogation." "It's all right," Sarah assured her, finding the girl's energy refreshing after months of dealing with children who had been taught to view education with suspicion. "Yes, I'm the school teacher, and I'd be happy to teach you once I'm recovered," Lily beamed. "Uncle Thomas says you're brave. He says most people in town are too afraid to do what's right, but you weren't." Sarah felt a flush that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Your uncle gives me too much credit. I just couldn't stand by and watch." "That's exactly what makes it brave," came a deep voice from the doorway. Thomas Hayes filled the frame, hat in hand, his tall figure silhouetted against the hallway light. He'd clearly just come in from working. There was dust on his clothes, and his face bore the healthy flush of physical exertion. But his eyes were fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her heart beat a little faster despite her injuries. "Mr. Hayes," she said, suddenly conscious of how she must look, "I can't thank you enough for your intervention." He stepped into the room, nodding at his sister and ruffling his niece's hair affectionately as he passed them. "No thanks necessary, Miss Zimmerman. I only did what any decent man should have done." He paused. "Though in Redemption Creek it seems decency is in short supply." "Uncle Thomas," Lily piped up, "Miss Zimmerman said she'll teach me when she's better." Hayes smiled at his niece, the expression transforming his serious face. "Did she now? Well, that's mighty generous considering she's still recovering." He looked back at Sarah. "No rush on that account. Doc Peterson says you need at least 2 weeks of bed rest for those ribs." "2 weeks," Sarah protested. "But the school will manage without you for a time," Hayes said firmly. "I've already spoken with the town council. They've arranged for Mrs. Barnes to take over temporarily. She taught the children before you arrived, so it's not ideal, but it will suffice." Sarah wanted to argue further she took her responsibilities seriously, but she couldn't deny the wisdom of his words. Even sitting up was exhausting her. Rose stood, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Come on, let's give Miss Zimmerman some peace. It's almost time to start dinner anyway." Lily looked disappointed but allowed herself to be led toward the door. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised Sarah. Once they were gone, Hayes moved closer, taking the chair his sister had vacated. Up close, Sarah could see the fine lines around his eyes, the flecks of gray in his otherwise dark hair. She guessed him to be in his mid-30s, old enough to have the confidence that came with experience but still very much in his prime. "How are you feeling, truly?" he asked, his voice lower now that they were alone. "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," Sarah admitted, "but better than I might have been, thanks to you." Hayes's mouth tightened. "I should have gotten there sooner." "You got there," Sarah said simply. "No one else did." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something Sarah couldn't quite name. "Why did you help us?" she finally asked. "You don't know me, and from what I understand, getting on Frank Miller's bad side isn't wise, even for someone with your standing." Hayes considered her question, his gaze steady. "I've been watching Redemption Creek change over the years. My father helped found this town, you know. It used to be a place where people looked out for one another. Now," he shook his head, "now they turn a blind eye to men like Miller, to injustice of all kinds because it's easier than standing up." He leaned forward slightly. "When I saw you there, one woman against 6 men defending someone weaker than yourself, I saw the Redemption Creek I remember from my childhood. The one I want back." Sarah swallowed, moved by the passion in his voice. "I'm afraid my actions might have made things worse, for Mrs. Miller especially." "No," Hayes said with certainty. "Miller would have killed her eventually if things continued as they were. You gave her a chance at a different life." He paused. "And showed me that I wasn't the only one who still believed this town could be better." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rose appeared with a tray. "Dinner for our patient," she announced. "Thomas, you should get cleaned up. Your food will be ready soon, too." Hayes nodded and rose to his feet. "Rest, Miss Zimmerman. We can talk more when you're stronger." As he left, Sarah found herself watching his retreating figure with a sense of curiosity and something else she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. For the first time since coming to Redemption Creek, she felt she might have found not just safety but understanding. The next few days passed in a blur of sleep, pain, and gradual healing. Sarah learned the rhythms of the Hayes household the early mornings as the ranch hands gathered for breakfast before heading out to work, the quiet hours when Rose managed the household affairs, the evenings when Thomas would return, sometimes with his foreman Simon Wallace to discuss ranch business over dinner. Lily was a frequent visitor to Sarah's room, bringing books from the family's library and chattering about life on the ranch. Through her, Sarah learned more about the Hayes family, how Thomas and Rose had lost their parents 10 years earlier to influenza, how Lily had come to live with them after her parents, Thomas's brother and sister-in-law, died in a stagecoach accident 3 years ago. "Uncle Thomas doesn't smile much since they died," Lily confided one afternoon as she helped Sarah brush her hair, "but he smiled when he brought you here." Martha Miller recovered more quickly than Sarah, at least physically. She was a quiet woman, beaten down by years of abuse, but Sarah began to see flashes of strength in her as she realized she was truly safe at Triple H. The two women spent hours together, Sarah reading aloud from books in the Hayes library when her voice was strong enough, or simply sitting in companionable silence. A week after their arrival, Thomas arranged for Martha's belongings to be brought from town. The same day, papers arrived from the territorial judge, divorce papers that would free Martha from her marriage. "Can he do that?" Martha asked fearfully when Rose explained what they were. "Will the judge allow it?" Judge Wilson and Thomas's father were old friends, Rose explained. "And Frank has made enough enemies that finding witnesses to his cruelty won't be difficult. The judge will be here in 2 weeks' time. You'll be a free woman before the month is out." Martha wept then, years of hopelessness finally giving way to possibility. Sarah, sitting nearby, felt her own eyes fill with tears. Thomas, who had been standing in the doorway, met her gaze over Martha's bowed head. The understanding that passed between them in that moment felt intimate in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. As Sarah grew stronger, she began to explore the ranch house. It was larger than she'd expected, built by Thomas's father with an eye toward both function and beauty. The main living areas were furnished with a combination of practical frontier pieces and finer items brought from the East, evidence of the Hayes family's prosperity and taste. She was examining the bookshelf in the study one afternoon, pleased to discover several volumes she hadn't read before when Thomas found her. "Looking for something in particular?" he asked, startling her slightly. Sarah turned, a copy of Thoreau's Walden in her hands. "Just browsing." "Your family has an impressive collection." "My mother's influence," he said, crossing to stand beside her. "She believed strongly in education. She would have approved of you taking over the school." He smiled slightly. "Though she might have suggested you avoid fistfights with the local ruffians." Sarah laughed, then winced as her ribs protested. "I'll try to remember that advice." Thomas's expression grew concerned. "You should be sitting down." He guided her to a comfortable leather chair near the window, then took the seat opposite her. "Doc Peterson is coming out tomorrow to check on you both. I expect he'll clear you to return to town soon if you wish." The thought of returning to her lonely room behind the schoolhouse, of facing the whispers and stares that would surely follow her now, filled Sarah with unexpected dread. "I suppose I must," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Thomas studied her face. "It's no imposition. In fact," he hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you. Lily has flourished under your guidance this past week. Rose does her best, but she has the household to manage, and Lily needs more structured education." "She's a bright girl," Sarah agreed, "very eager to learn." "Yes, she is." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "I've been considering hiring a governess for her, but finding someone willing to come all the way out here has proven difficult, and now that I've seen how well you work with her." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me a position?" "I am," he confirmed. "You would have a proper salary, of course more than the town pays you, I assure you." You'd continue living here with your own suite of rooms. In the afternoons, you could still ride into town to teach at the school if you wish, or we could arrange for the children who truly want an education to come here instead. The offer was tempting more than tempting. That's very generous, Sarah said carefully. But I'm not sure the town would approve of such an arrangement. Thomas's mouth quirked into a half-smile. Because you're an unmarried woman living in the home of an unmarried man, Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Yes, that's part of it. Rose serves as chaperone and your reputation is above reproach, but if it concerns you— He paused, his gray eyes intent on her face. The offer stands regardless. Think about it. You don't need to decide immediately. Before Sarah could respond, Lily burst into the room, excitement radiating from her. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Rose says the new foal is coming. Can we go watch? Can Miss Zimmerman come too if she feels well enough? Thomas's expression softened as it always did around his niece. If Miss Zimmerman feels up to it and if she wishes to come, yes. Sarah found herself nodding before she'd fully considered it. I'd like that. I've never seen a foal being born. The relief on Lily's face made it clear she'd feared being denied this experience. Thank you. I'll tell Aunt Rose to prepare a place for us to sit in the barn. After she dashed out, Thomas turned back to Sarah. Are you certain birth is a messy business and you're still recovering? I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Hayes, Sarah said with a smile. And I find I'm quite curious about the workings of your ranch. Something flickered in his eyes, approval perhaps, or something warmer. Very well, I'll help you to the barn when it's time. That evening, Thomas made good on his promise, offering his arm to steady Sarah as they walked slowly to the large barn where the pregnant mare had been moved. Inside, lanterns had been hung to provide light, and Rose had arranged bales of hay covered with blankets to create comfortable seating at a respectful distance from the mare. Sarah settled onto one of the makeshift seats, with Lily immediately claiming the spot beside her. Thomas conferred quietly with his foreman and the ranch hand who served as their horse expert before joining the women. It will be a while yet, he told them, taking a seat on Sarah's other side. First foals often come slowly. The hours passed in quiet conversation. Rose brought out hot coffee and blankets as the night air grew cooler. Lily eventually fell asleep against Sarah's shoulder, and Thomas gently moved his niece to a more comfortable position on a pile of hay. She'll be disappointed to miss it, Sarah whispered. We'll wake her when the time comes, Thomas assured her. Simon says it won't be long now. With Lily asleep and Rose having returned to the house to check on Martha, Sarah and Thomas were effectively alone despite the presence of the ranch hands on the other side of the barn. In the soft lantern light, Sarah found herself studying his profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. You're staring, Miss Zimmerman, Thomas said softly without turning his head. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. I'm sorry, I was just thinking. About what? About how different you are from what I expected when I first came to Redemption Creek. Now he did turn to look at her, eyebrow raised in question. And what did you expect? I heard stories about the rancher at Triple H, Sarah admitted, that you were hard, unforgiving. That you kept to yourself and wanted nothing to do with the town. Thomas's expression remained neutral, but she saw tension in the set of his shoulders. And now, what do you think now? Sarah considered her words carefully. I think you care deeply about your family, about this land, about justice. I think you keep to yourself because you've been disappointed by people in the past, and I think— She hesitated, then continued, I think you're a good man, Thomas Hayes, better than this town deserves. Something shifted in his gaze, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. For a moment, Sarah thought he might reach for her hand where it rested between them on the hay bale. Instead, he looked back toward the mare. She's starting, he said quietly. I should wake Lily. The birth itself was indeed messy, but also beautiful in a primal way that took Sarah's breath away. The mare worked hard, guided by instinct and occasionally assisted by the experienced ranch hands. When the foal finally emerged in a rush of fluid and effort, its wet coat gleaming in the lantern light, Sarah found herself gripping Thomas's arm in excitement. Lily was transfixed, her earlier sleepiness forgotten as she watched the newborn struggle to find its legs. "Look at him," she exclaimed as the foal wobbled upright, falling and trying again with stubborn determination. "He's so strong already," she corrected Thomas with a smile. "It's a filly." "A girl," Lily breathed, her expression reverent. "What will you name her, Uncle Thomas?" Thomas looked thoughtful, then glanced at Sarah. "What do you think, Miss Zimmerman? Would you like to name her?" Sarah was startled by the offer. Naming a new foal seemed like a family privilege. "Are you certain?" He nodded. "Consider it a welcome to Triple H." The implications of his words weren't lost on her. Sarah studied the foal, now successfully standing and investigating its mother on unsteady legs. "Hope," she said finally. "I'd like to call her Hope." Thomas's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Hope it is," he agreed softly. 2 weeks after the beating, Doc Peterson declared both Sarah and Martha sufficiently recovered to resume normal activities, though he cautioned Sarah against anything too strenuous for another week. "Those ribs are healing nicely, but they're still tender," he warned as he packed up his bag. "No horseback riding, no lifting heavy objects, and for heaven's sake, no more fistfights with men twice your size." "You have my word," Sarah promised with a smile. After the doctor left, Sarah found Thomas in his study, reviewing the ranch accounts. He looked up when she entered, setting aside his pencil. "Doc Peterson says you've made a remarkable recovery," he said, rising to his feet. "He credits good care and a strong constitution." "And a comfortable bed," Sarah added. "I've been spoiled here." Thomas gestured for her to sit. "Have you given any thought to my offer about teaching Lily?" Sarah had thought of little else in the days since he'd proposed it. "I have, and I'd like to accept with one condition." "Name it." "I want to continue teaching at the school in town as well, at least 3 days a week," Sarah said firmly. "There are children there who need education just as much as Lily does, even if their parents don't always see the value in it." Thomas considered this, then nodded. "That seems reasonable. I can arrange for someone to drive you into town on those days." "I can ride," Sarah countered. "Once my ribs are fully healed." A smile tugged at his mouth. "Of course you can. Very well, we have an agreement." He extended his hand, and Sarah took it, feeling a spark of something like electricity where their skin touched. His hand was warm and calloused, enveloping hers completely. "There's something else," Thomas said, not releasing her hand immediately. "Judge Wilson arrives tomorrow to handle Martha's divorce proceedings. I thought, perhaps you might accompany me to town. Your testimony will help her case." Sarah nodded. "Of course, I want to help her in any way I can." "It might be uncomfortable," he warned. "Miller and his friends won't have forgotten what happened." "I'm not afraid," Sarah said, lifting her chin slightly. Thomas's expression softened. "No, I don't believe you are afraid of much, Miss Zimmerman." The following day, Sarah rode into Redemption Creek, seated beside Thomas in his wagon. Martha followed in a second wagon with Rose and Simon Wallace, who had become something of a protector to the abused woman during her stay at Triple H. Sarah felt the stares as soon as they entered town. Some were hostile, others merely curious, but all followed their progress down the main street toward the small building that served as the town's courthouse and meeting hall. Frank Miller and a group of his friends were gathered outside the saloon. As Thomas helped Sarah down from the wagon, Miller spat in the dirt. "Bringing your fancy woman to town, Hayes," he called, alcohol slurring his words despite the early hour. "Guess she showed her true colors, shacking up with the richest man around." Thomas stiffened beside her, but Sarah placed a restraining hand on his arm. "He's trying to provoke you," she murmured. "Don't give him the satisfaction." Miller wasn't finished. "And look if it ain't my wayward wife, been spreading your legs for Hayes's men, Martha." "That why you think you can leave me?" Before Thomas could respond, Simon Wallace was there, placing himself between Martha and her husband. "One more word, Miller, and they'll be carrying you into that courtroom." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Miller glared but fell silent as the group made their way into the courthouse. Judge Wilson was a thin man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to Martha's testimony about years of abuse, then to Sarah's account of the beating she'd witnessed and suffered. When Frank Miller's turn came to speak, his denials and excuses fell flat against the evidence of Martha's still healing injuries, and the testimony of several townspeople whom Thomas had convinced to speak up. In less than 2 hours, it was done. Martha Miller became Martha Wilson once more, returning to her maiden name along with her freedom. The judge also ordered Frank to pay her a settlement from the sale of their house and business, a harness shop that Martha had actually managed while Frank drank away most of their profits. As they left the courthouse, Sarah noticed Martha speaking quietly with Simon Wallace. The foreman's expression was gentle, his posture protective without being possessive, a stark contrast to Frank Miller's aggressive stance across the street, where he glowered at the proceedings with his friends. "They've become close," Thomas commented, following Sarah's gaze. "Simon lost his wife to fever 3 years ago. I think he recognizes something in Martha, a resilience beneath the fear." "Do you think she'll stay at Triple H?" Sarah asked. Thomas nodded. "For a time at least. Rose has offered her the position of housekeeper's assistant. Martha's an excellent seamstress as well. She's already been mending things around the ranch. It gives her purpose while she decides what she wants for her future." As they prepared to leave town, Sarah asked to stop briefly at the schoolhouse to collect some of her personal items and books. Thomas accompanied her, waiting outside as she unlocked the door to the small building that had been her workplace and home for the past 6 months. Inside, everything was just as she'd left it, her lessons still written on the blackboard, her few belongings neatly arranged in the back room. It felt strange now, this space that had once represented her independence. After the warmth and life of Triple H, the schoolhouse seemed lonely and austere. She was gathering books when she heard the door open behind her. Expecting Thomas, she turned with a smile that died on her lips when she saw Frank Miller standing there instead, his expression ugly with drink and anger. "So you're moving out for good," he slurred. "Going to play house with Hayes while my wife serves you both." Sarah backed away, acutely aware of the empty schoolroom and the distance to the door. "Mr. Miller, you need to leave, now," he advanced on her, unsteady but determined. "You cost me my wife, my home, my reputation." His hand went to his belt, drawing a knife that gleamed dully in the afternoon light. "Think I ought to take something from you in return?" Sarah's mind raced. She could try to run past him, but in his current position, he blocked the only exit. She could scream, but the schoolhouse was at the edge of town, and there was no guarantee anyone would hear her in time. Her ribs, still healing, limited her movement. She grabbed a heavy book from the desk, holding it like a shield. "Thomas is right outside. He'll kill you if you touch me." Miller laughed, the sound chilling in its emptiness. "Hayes went to fetch your things from the general store. Saw him myself on my way here. It's just you and me now, teacher." He lunged suddenly, knife extended. Sarah swung the book, connecting with his arm hard enough to throw off his aim. The knife slashed through her sleeve, grazing her forearm. She cried out in pain but used the moment to dart toward the door. Miller recovered quickly, grabbing her by the hair and yanking her backward with enough force that Sarah felt stitches tear in her barely healed ribs. She struck out blindly, her elbow connecting with his stomach, driving the air from his lungs in a whoosh. His grip loosened just enough for her to break free. She stumbled toward the door, throwing it open and staggering out into the sunlight. "Help!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with fear. "Thomas!" Miller was behind her, his face contorted with rage as he raised the knife again. Sarah braced herself for the blow that never came. Instead, there was a thunderous crack, and Miller dropped to his knees, blood blooming across his shirt from a gunshot wound in his shoulder. Thomas stood 20 feet away, his pistol still raised, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, several townspeople had emerged from nearby buildings, drawn by Sarah's scream and the gunshot. "Someone fetch Doc Peterson," Thomas commanded, not taking his eyes off Miller as he approached. "And Sheriff Daniels, if he's back in town." He kicked the knife away from Miller's reach, then turned to Sarah. His expression changed instantly from rage to concern as he took in her bloodied arm and pale face. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Sarah shook her head, though her ribs throbbed painfully. "Just my arm. It's not deep." Thomas's jaw tightened as he examined the cut. Without a word, he removed his bandana and bound it tightly around her forearm to stem the bleeding. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "I thought I'd lost you." The raw emotion in those simple words made Sarah's breath catch. "I'm all right," she assured him, placing her hand over his where it rested against her arm. "Thanks to you." Sheriff Daniels arrived minutes later, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. After hearing accounts from Sarah and the witnesses who had seen Miller follow her into the schoolhouse, he arrested the injured man, promising he would stand trial for attempted murder. "Don't think he'll be seeing the outside of a prison for many years," the sheriff told Thomas as Doc Peterson tended to Sarah's arm. "Between this and the beating 2 weeks ago, he's done for." Thomas nodded grimly. "Make sure of it, Sheriff. If he walks free, I can't be responsible for my actions." The ride back to Triple H was quiet. Sarah, exhausted by the events of the day and the pain of her re-injured ribs, found herself leaning against Thomas's solid warmth as the wagon bumped along the rutted road. His arm came around her shoulders, steadying her, protecting her. "I shouldn't have left you alone," he said after a long silence. "Not with Miller in that state." "You couldn't have known he would follow me," Sarah replied, "and I'm beginning to think trouble follows me regardless." Thomas's arm tightened slightly around her. "Then I'll just have to stay closer, won't I?" The words sent a flutter through Sarah that had nothing to do with her injuries. She looked up at his profile, struck again by the strength there and the gentleness that few were privileged to see. In that moment, she realized with perfect clarity that she was falling in love with Thomas Hayes had been falling since the day he found her in the dirt, and declared she had done right when the rest of the town had turned away. The knowledge should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a sense of peace, as though some part of her had always been moving toward this man, this place, this life. When they arrived at the ranch, Rose was waiting anxiously on the porch, having been alerted by Simon, who had ridden ahead. Her face paled at the sight of Sarah's bloodied sleeve and exhausted posture. "What happened?" she demanded as Thomas lifted Sarah carefully from the wagon. "Miller," Thomas replied grimly. "He went after Sarah at the schoolhouse." Rose's expression hardened. "Is he dead?" "Unfortunately, no," Thomas said. "Just wounded. The sheriff has him now." He carried Sarah into the house despite her weak protests that she could walk, settling her gently on the sofa in the parlor. Rose hurried to fetch clean bandages and water to properly dress the wound now that they were home. "I'm getting rather tired of being injured," Sarah said with a weak attempt at humor as Thomas knelt beside her. "It's becoming a habit." His expression remained serious as he took her uninjured hand between both of his. "Sarah," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I need to say something." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes. When I saw Miller with that knife, when I thought I might be too late." He paused, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I realized I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, not just because of Lily or because you've become important to the ranch, because you've become important to me." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas." "I know it's soon," he continued. "We've only known each other a short time, but I feel as though I've been waiting for you without realizing it. You're brave and kind and stubborn in all the right ways." His eyes, usually so guarded, were open and vulnerable now. "I'm falling in love with you, Sarah Zimmerman, and if you could see your way to giving me a chance to court you properly, I'd be the happiest man in the territory." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, not from pain but from a joy so intense it was almost overwhelming. "I don't need courting," she said softly. "I already know what's in my heart. I love you too, Thomas. I think perhaps I have since the day you said I did right when everyone else thought I was wrong." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden and brilliant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Sarah answered by raising her uninjured arm to curve around his neck, drawing him closer, deepening the kiss with a certainty that belied her limited experience. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to be proper about this," he said. "I won't have anyone in town thinking less of you," Sarah smiled. "I think that ship may have sailed when I moved into your home after knowing you less than a day," he chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. "Fair point. But still, I want to do right by you. You already have," she assured him. "More than anyone ever has." Rose cleared her throat from the doorway, a basin of water in her hands and a knowing smile on her face. "I hate to interrupt, but that arm needs tending." Thomas straightened, a faint flush coloring his cheekbones, though he kept hold of Sarah's hand. "Rose, I've asked Sarah to allow me to court her, and she's agreed." Rose's smile widened. "Court her? Thomas Hayes, I've never seen you move so slowly in your life." "Marry the woman before she comes to her senses and realizes she could do better." "Rose," Thomas protested, though there was laughter in his voice. "What? I'm only saying what everyone at Triple H has been thinking since you brought her home." Rose set down the basin and began to unwrap Sarah's makeshift bandage. "Lily's already planning where to put Sarah's books in the family library." Sarah laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her ribs. "I'm glad to have the family's approval at least." "More than approval," Rose assured her. "We've been hoping you'd stay since the day you started teaching Lily. The fact that you've managed to make my stone-faced brother smile again is just an added blessing." Over the weeks that followed, Sarah settled into life at Triple H with an ease that surprised her. She established a routine, teaching Lily in the mornings and riding into town 3 days a week to continue her classes at the schoolhouse. The town's reaction to her new position and her relationship with Thomas was mixed. Some approved, seeing it as a natural progression given her circumstances, while others whispered behind their hands about the schoolteacher who had caught the territory's most eligible rancher. Sarah found she cared less about their opinions with each passing day. The children still came to learn, and that was what mattered to her. Some parents even began to show more interest in their children's education, perhaps influenced by Thomas's open support of the school. Martha Wilson remained at Triple H, flourishing under Rose's guidance and developing a quiet but unmistakable attachment to Simon Wallace. The foreman moved with careful patience, mindful of her recent ordeal, but the gentle way he watched over her spoke volumes about his intentions. Frank Miller was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison for attempted murder and assault. The news brought a sense of closure to both Sarah and Martha, though Sarah suspected it would be a long time before either of them felt completely safe in town without Thomas or Simon nearby. As summer turned to autumn, Triple H prepared for the annual Harvest Festival. It was tradition for the ranch to host the event, inviting both the hands who worked the land and the townsfolk who wished to attend. This year, with Sarah's influence, the celebration would also include displays of the schoolchildren's work and readings from their lessons. The morning of the festival dawned clear and crisp. Sarah stood on the porch, watching as the ranch hands strung lanterns between the trees and set up tables for the feast that would follow the day's activities. Thomas approached from the barn, his stride purposeful as he crossed the yard to join her. "Everything is nearly ready," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Rose has outdone herself with the food, and Simon says the hands have prepared some sort of surprise entertainment." "I can't wait to see it," Sarah replied with a smile. Lily is beside herself with excitement about reciting her poem. Thomas's expression grew serious as he took her hand. "I have something to ask you before everyone arrives." Sarah's heart quickened. Over the past months, Their relationship had deepened into something she had never thought to find in the rough frontier of Colorado, a partnership of equals, built on respect and a love that grew stronger each day. "What is it?" she asked. Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had this brought from Denver," he said, opening it to reveal a ring with a modest but beautifully cut diamond set in gold. "It was my mother's. She always said it should go to the woman who brought life back to Triple H." Sarah's breath caught as he went down on one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Sarah Zimmerman, you came into my life like a storm, unexpected and powerful and changing everything in your wake. You've brought courage and compassion and joy back to this ranch, to Lily, to me. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked down at this man who had protected her, respected her, loved her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Thomas, with all my heart." His face lit with a smile as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, tender and passionate at once, until they were interrupted by a delighted squeal from the doorway. "Uncle Thomas, Miss Sarah, are you getting married?" Lily danced around them, her excitement contagious. "Does this mean you'll be my aunt for real?" Sarah laughed, kneeling to embrace the girl who had captured her heart almost as quickly as Thomas had. "Yes, sweetheart, if that's all right with you." "All right, it's wonderful." Lily hugged her fiercely. "I've been praying for it every night." Rose appeared behind her niece, her eyes suspiciously bright as she took in the scene. "Finally," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was beginning to think I'd need to propose for him." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and free in a way it had rarely been before Sarah came into his life. "I was waiting for the right moment. And the harvest festival seemed appropriate," Rose teased. "New beginnings," Thomas said simply, his arm around Sarah's waist. "What better time?" The festival was a success beyond anyone's expectations. The townspeople came in greater numbers than in previous years, drawn by curiosity about the schoolteacher who had captured Thomas Hayes's heart and by the promise of seeing their children's work displayed. As dusk fell and lanterns illuminated the gathering, Thomas and Sarah announced their engagement to cheers from the ranch hands and polite congratulations from most of the townspeople. Even those who had disapproved of their relationship seemed mollified by the propriety of an official engagement. After the announcement, as guests mingled and children played games organized by Lily and her friends, Sarah found herself approached by Martha Wilson. The woman had changed dramatically in the months since her divorce. She stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her manner more confident. "I wanted to thank you," Martha said quietly. "Not just for what you did that day in town, but for showing me that a different life was possible. Seeing you here so strong and happy, it gave me courage." Sarah smiled, touched by her words. "You had that courage inside you all along, Martha. You just needed a safe place to find it." Martha glanced across the yard to where Simon Wallace was deep in conversation with Thomas. "I've found more than safety here," she admitted, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Simon has asked permission to court me properly. I never thought I could trust a man again, but he's different." "He is," Sarah agreed warmly. "And so deserving of happiness as are you." As Martha moved away to help Rose with the serving of desserts, Thomas rejoined Sarah, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Sarah leaned into him, surveying the scene before them, Lily and the other children running with sparklers in the gathering darkness, ranch hands and townspeople sharing food and stories. Martha and Simon standing close together by the punch bowl, their faces glowing in the lantern light. It was a vision of the community Thomas had described to her months ago, one where people looked out for one another, where justice and kindness mattered. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "And you?" Thomas's arms tightened around her. "I have everything I never knew I wanted," he said. "A woman who stands up for what's right, no matter the cost, a partner to build a future with, a love I never thought to find." He turned her gently to face him, cupping her face in his calloused hands. That day in town, when I told you I'd protect you, I had no idea you would end up protecting my heart, saving me from the bitterness I was sinking into." Sarah raised herself on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "We saved each other," she whispered against his lips. "And now we have a lifetime to build something beautiful together." As the stars appeared in the clear Colorado sky, Thomas and Sarah moved among their guests, hands linked, future bright before them. From violence and pain had come healing and love, a love strong enough to change not just two lives, but an entire community. It wasn't the life Sarah had imagined when she'd left Boston for the wild frontier, but standing beside the man who had seen her courage when others saw only foolishness. She knew it was infinitely better than any life she could have planned. The winter wedding of Thomas Hayes and Sarah Zimmerman became the social event of the season in Redemption Creek. Held in the ranch's main house, decorated with evergreens and white ribbons, the ceremony brought together the entire community, from ranch hands to townspeople to the territorial judge who performed the service. Sarah wore a gown of ivory silk that Rose had helped her select on a special trip to Denver, while Thomas cut a striking figure in a new black suit. Lily, serving as flower girl, practically vibrated with excitement as she scattered rose petals along the path where Sarah would walk to meet her soon-to-be husband. Martha Wilson, now officially courting Simon Wallace, stood as Sarah's matron of honor, her quiet strength a testament to how far both women had come since that violent day in town 8 months earlier. As Sarah moved through the crowded room toward Thomas, she caught glimpses of faces that had once been hostile now wearing expressions of grudging respect or even genuine goodwill. Her students watched with wide eyes, the girls sighing romantically and the boys trying to look bored despite their fascination with their teacher's transformation from Miss Zimmerman to the future Mrs. Hayes. When she reached Thomas, he took her hands in his gray eyes full of a love so profound it took her breath away. "You look beautiful," he whispered for her ears alone. "And you look like everything I never knew I was searching for," she answered softly. The vows were traditional, but spoken with a sincerity that moved even the most stoic of the guests. When Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He swept her into his arms with a passion that drew cheers from the ranch hands and made Lily giggle behind her bouquet. The celebration continued long into the night, with dancing and feasting and stories shared around roaring fires. As midnight approached, Thomas led Sarah away from the festivities toward the newly renovated east wing of the house, which would be their private quarters. "Are you happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked as he closed the door behind them, shutting out the sounds of the ongoing celebration. Sarah smiled up at her husband, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Thomas drew her into his arms, his touch reverent as he traced the line of her jaw. "When I saw you that day, standing up to Miller and his friends, I thought you were either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I'd ever seen." "And now?" Sarah asked, her hands resting against the solid warmth of his chest. "Now I know you're both," he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And I thank God every day that you brought that courage and spirit to Redemption Creek, to Triple H." His voice softened. "To me." As Thomas lowered his mouth to hers, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged in this place. With this man, building a life founded on the courage to stand up for what was right, and the love to sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. 5 years later, the Triple H Ranch had grown in prosperity and reputation under the joint management of Thomas and Sarah Hayes. The main house had expanded to accommodate their growing family, 4-year-old James, named for Thomas's father, and 2-year-old Elizabeth, called Libby, who had her mother's spirit and her father's gray eyes. The schoolhouse in town had been replaced by a larger building that now served as both school and community library, with Sarah overseeing a staff of 3 teachers including Martha Wallace, who had married Simon 2 years earlier and discovered a talent for teaching the youngest children. Redemption Creek itself had changed, growing into a town that better lived up to its name, a place where justice mattered and community meant more than convenience. The changes hadn't come easily or without resistance, but Thomas and Sarah's influence, backed by their prosperity and principled leadership, had gradually shifted the town's culture. On the 5th anniversary of the day Thomas had found Sarah defending Martha in the town square, the Hayes family hosted a special dinner at the ranch. Gathered around the table were those who had become their closest friends and allies: Rose and her new husband Daniel Peterson, the doctor's son who had returned from medical school back east, Lily, who was now 17 and planning to attend college in Denver the following year, and the Wallaces with their infant son. As Thomas rose to offer a toast, Sarah watched him with the same love that had only deepened over their years together. He was still the strongest man she knew, but the hard edges that grief and disillusionment had carved into him had softened, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world and his purpose in it. 5 years ago today, Thomas began, raising his glass, I witnessed something rare in this world: a woman with the courage to stand against injustice when everyone else turned away. What I didn't know then was that I was also seeing my future wife, the mother of my children, and the heart of everything Triple H has become. He turned to Sarah, his eyes full of love. To Sarah, who taught me that true strength lies not in standing alone but in standing up for others. Who showed me that one person with courage can change not just a life but an entire community. To Sarah, echoed the others, raising their glasses. Sarah blinked back tears as she stood to join her husband. And to all of you, she said, looking around at the faces of those who had become family in every way that mattered. Because what I've learned in these 5 years is that while it may take one person to start a change, it takes a community to make it last. As the conversation and laughter flowed around them, Thomas slipped his arm around Sarah's waist, drawing her close. Happy, he murmured against her hair. Sarah leaned into his embrace, watching as James showed Lily his latest drawing and Libby charmed Simon into giving her an extra piece of cake. Across the table, Martha was deep in conversation with Rose about plans for expanding the school program, her confidence a far cry from the frightened woman Sarah had defended all those years ago. More than happy, Sarah answered, turning to meet her husband's gaze. Grateful. For every moment since you said I did right and promised to protect me. Thomas's smile held all the love and promise that had carried them through the challenges of building a life together on the frontier. That was the easiest promise I ever made, he said softly. And the one I'll keep renewing every day for the rest of our lives. As night fell over Triple H Ranch, stars appearing like diamonds in the Colorado sky, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this was what courage was, for not for glory or recognition, but for moments like this. Moments of perfect belonging, of lives intertwined through choice and commitment, of communities made stronger through acts of justice and compassion. It had begun with a single act of courage, a schoolteacher standing up for a woman in need. It had grown into something neither Sarah nor Thomas could have imagined that day in the dusty street of Redemption Creek. And in the warmth of their home, surrounded by the family they had built together, it was clear that their story, a story of courage, protection, and enduring love, was still just beginning.